Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good night. I don't know when you're listening, but whenever you're listening, I am sure glad that you are. Guys, this is Unpopular Opinions. You already knew that. What you didn't know, well, actually you did already know, because we probably had it listed in the title. What I didn't know until just a little bit ago is that we have V2.2 of Solo List Assault Super Nintendo Countdown. Now, last time, I thought that I might get through 100 or maybe 50 entries in this list, and I did not make it that far. I did not. I did 10, and I got myself so worked up that I had to take a little bitty break. How many times did I just say bitty? Holy cow. Guys, before we get into the show today, I just want to give a huge shout out to our sponsor, eToro. eToro is a smart crypto trading platform. You know, there's an app, there's a website, whatever. But let me tell you some of its best features. One, you can build a diversified portfolio on eToro. You can trade 15 different cryptocurrencies. It used to be 14. One was just added. There's top security. There's no hidden fees. And if all of this makes you skeptical, if dipping your toe, that big toe, the sweatiest one, you want to dip it in the little lagoon of freshness. Okay. If you're scared, you can go on eToro and you can get $100,000 virtual portfolio, and you can practice trading cryptos with that. And then once you're super, super confident because you've gone through your 100,000 fake dollars, just go to the bank, pull out 100,000 real dollars, turn that into millions and trade for real. Guys, this is Unpopular Opinions. I'm Ryan Tofil. You're listening to Solo List Assault. I just want to thank everyone who listened to the first part of this list. It was, I think, the second most downloads I've ever had on an episode. And I definitely don't think that it was because you guys just love listening to me so much. I think it might be a little bit of demand for the super content, the Super Nintendo content. I was telling Dan earlier today that I tried before to find a good Super Nintendo podcast, and I can't do it. I mean, there are a lot bigger guys out there than me, but they don't exclusively talk about the Super Nintendo very often. So I think for someone like me who would like to be able to go on the internet and find content about the Super Nintendo, this podcast would be right up my alley, which is why I'm the one talking about it. But I think that there might be a few more of me out there. I'm not the most knowledgeable about the Super Nintendo. I'm not the most knowledgeable about anything. But no one else is doing this. If you can do this better than me, please do, because I would love to listen. I just couldn't find this type of content out there anywhere. I mean, think about how many people we have. They're streaming new games or they're reviewing newer games. This to me is the best console of all time. Now, I'm biased. I did not grow up playing the Sega Genesis. I grew up playing the Super Nintendo. And I was born in 1992, so I by the time I started to get my faculties about me and make any of my own decisions, the Super Nintendo had kind of phased out. But when I was young and at the mercy of playing whatever games that my dad liked to play, and then I would play, mostly sports games, but we did have Super Mario World, which became my favorite game of all time to this day. The Super Nintendo is right in my wheelhouse, man. Number 90 on our countdown, Super Star Wars Return of the Jedi. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I am not Super Star Wars fan number one. And by super Star Wars fan, I meant Star Wars fan super number one in regards to the movies, just the whole fandom of it. It is something I can definitely appreciate that other people love. It's just not something that I've been super into myself. Now, this is what Sid Lexia has rated as the worst of the 3 Super Star Wars games. The third and final game in the Super Star Wars trilogy, not only will you relive all of your favorite moments from Return of the Jedi in this semi-faithful adaptation of the movie, you'll also fight the Rancor, Jabba the Hutt, Darth Vader, and Emperor Palpatine. What more could you possibly want? And the biggest complaint for this game is that it suffers from an unfortunate and egregious lack of Boba Fett. I've never played this game. As I said, I've never been a huge Star Wars fan. Growing up, I'd never seen any of the Star Wars movies. I think the first time I ever watched a Star Wars movie was probably 2015 or 2016. When the new Star Wars movies started coming out, I can't even remember. Rey was the main character. Like I said, guys, please excuse this. I've never claimed to be a big Star Wars fan, and I've never insulted anybody who loves Star Wars. Just Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. Those are 3 big series in a lot of people's lives that I have just never really gotten into. I've never super gotten into them, even on the Super Nintendo. Number 89, Mega Man Soccer. Now, I haven't played a ton of this game. I've tried it out once, and it was so far below the quality of the Mega Man games on the NES and SNES that I don't even know if I made it through a full game. I think that this game was rushed. I've never beaten it, but from what I've read, winning this game, if you go through if there is a story mode or a tournament or whatever, you go through it, and when you beat it, it just boots you back to the main screen. Like they didn't even really program a decent ending into this. I mean, but it's soccer. It's Super Nintendo soccer. It's about as good as any of the other soccer games on the Super Nintendo. The FIFA games suffered from a little bit of slowdown. They weren't the smoothest. Super Soccer was okay, but it was so early in the Super Nintendo life cycle that they had time to make better things after that. Now, these guys on this website are saying that Mario Strikers has this to thank for its existence. And I would have to imagine that that's true. I mean, if it's like the first mascot soccer game out there, then it would make sense that Mario Strikers would come from this. Just like I don't think that there would have been a Crash Team Racing if there hadn't been a Mario Kart. Super Mario Strikers is a great game, though. It's a great game, especially one of my favorite things about the GameCube, and I don't know why every system just didn't do this, is the 4-player compatibility. Just give me 4 freaking sockets. Well, plugins, controller ports. Just give me those on the front of the system so that I can have my friends over and plug these bad boys in. Now, even today, I think the PS4 limits it at 4 players. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. I know I've never had more than 4 people, but like, I never understood that. Why you wouldn't want to let people buy as many controllers as possible and use them all at once. I mean, I understand it's got to do something to do with processing power once you get into like double digits or whatever on the same machine. Like you can't split screen everything, but like Super Mario Strikers, everybody's on the same screen. And this is a blast. You get 3 of your friends, you got a 4v4 team, and you guys co-op it through the adventure mode or career mode or tournament mode or whatever it's called in that game. Now, I didn't play any of these games that I'm talking about today in preparation. These are just games that I played in the past. So I'm really, really sorry, if I'm messing up a few of the details in regards to Mega Man Soccer or a few of the details in regards to Super Mario Strikers or something like that. But like I said, I didn't even know that we were going to hit you with a solo list assault until just a little while ago. But now that we're in the midst of the assault, I can't go back in time and play these games in preparation. You know what I'm saying? So I don't remember every detail about Mega Man Soccer, and I don't remember every detail about Super Mario Strikers. What I do remember is the general idea that Super Mario Strikers was fun. And it was more fun the more people you had. And they were all in the same room. And this is something that I would love to see more of in video games. I want to see less microtransactions. I've done the rant on that. You can go to the first solo list assault. And the last 10 minutes of that is just me going to town. I blacked out. I don't even really remember what the heck I was going on about because I was just so excited. It was just something triggered me. I got triggered. It was almost as if somebody had said that there are only 2 genders. It triggered me. Only 2 genders. Woo! Mega Man Soccer. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't up to the quality that Capcom had set with the 6 NES Mega Man games. And then the Mega Man X series on Super Nintendo. I know Mega Man 7 on Super Nintendo, which is later on this list, isn't quite as well regarded as Mega Man X on the Super Nintendo or the first 6 Mega Man games on the NES. But I think it's fair to say that it beat the pants off Mega Man Soccer. Mega Man Soccer was an okay Super Nintendo game as far as a Mega Man and what Mega Man stood for at that point in time. It was definitely below average. And I don't know if there were any PC, like, learn typing with Mega Man games or something like that. I've also never played the Game Boy ones. I would have to imagine that when Mega Man Soccer came out in 1994, it was probably the worst game Mega Man that had come out to that point. Now, I know that Mega Man 1 was not super well received in America, but Mega Man 2 was. We're lucky they even brought Mega Man 2 to America with the reception that we got in Mega Man 1. But I'm not talking about sales. I'm talking about how good the game is and how well it's aged. And you'd have to be a pretty hardcore Mega Man Soccer fan to try to convince anyone that Mega Man Soccer is a superior game to Mega Man 1 on the on the NES. Mega Man Soccer's on the SNES, and we're comparing it to Mega Man 1 on the NES. Even though they're 2 supposedly different genres, even though they have the same main character, there is not really a competition. Despite the terrible box art, Mega Man 1 went on to spawn an incredible 6-game series on that console alone, and Mega Man has never ventured into the realm of footy, as the English call it, ever again. Some of the characters in this game are just like the bosses from Mega Man. I mean, obviously you have Mega Man, then there's Skull Man, Flash Man, Bubble Man, Toad Man, Cut Man, Elect Man, Bomb Man, Dust Man, Air Man, Ice Man, Needle Man, Top Man, Fire Man, Pharaoh Man, Wood Man, Snake Man, Gemini Man, Anchor. All those mans, and then we got Anchor? I don't even know who that is. Proto Man, Dr. Wily, and of course, Mega Man. Number 8. Earthworm Jim 2. Came out in 1995. That's kind of late in terms of SNES years. I mean, Mega Man Soccer came out in 1994. Super Star Wars Return of the Jedi came out in 1994. Earthworm Jim 2 was 1995. So, Mega Man Soccer and Super Star Wars were kind of more in the meat. You know what I'm saying, of the Super Nintendo? Like that is around the time where they just started to hit their stride with the Super Nintendo. And it's like, okay, the early days of the NES and the SNES, they look very different than the end of those consoles' lifespan. And you don't really see that anymore. I mean, obviously, there are differences between, NBA 2K14 and NBA 2K20, but they're mostly the same game. I mean, look at Call of Duty. Call of Duty, I would argue that it's essentially the same game that we were playing in 2007 with Modern Warfare. Call of Duty 4. Things were moving in supersonic speed back in the day. Like, think about it. You when the NES came out, you had those black box games that were super simple. I mean, Excite Bike. It wasn't even 2-player. You could construct your own track, but other than that, it's just a guy in a bike going from left to right with a few obstacles in his way. Same with Mario. I mean, when you look at what happened from Mario 1 to Mario 3 and how linear it was to what it became, you can see that they really made some progress during a single console's lifespan. We don't really see that anymore, but we did still see it even with the Super Nintendo. While they still had decent games that were coming out around launch, and their best game that came out around launch, you saw that they were learning how to do things with the system's processing power. I don't think that Earthworm Jim, even if they knew how to do it or had the idea for it in 1991 when the Super Nintendo was first released, I don't know if they could have pulled it off at that time. Earthworm Jim 2 is quite different from the first. It's very diverse in its levels and gameplay, and I kind of like it. You've got some good old-fashioned platforming, some classic bouncing babies action, and they even managed to throw in a game of Simon while they were at it. I have yet to figure out the deal with the cows between the levels. What's up with that? I've not played Earthworm Jim 2. I've played Earthworm Jim. I played a PC port of that back in the day. I didn't make it very far because I was a little youngster and I wasn't very good at games, and Earthworm Jim was kind of hard. But I've heard a lot of people say that they actually prefer Earthworm Jim on the Sega Genesis because of the sound. Now, the Sega Genesis didn't have quite as powerful of a sound chip as the Super Nintendo. So what the Genesis did was it didn't try to go for super realistic sounds like the Super Nintendo would often try to do. Instead, it went for a real gritty, adult kind of sound. And Earthworm Jim is one of those games where it might actually work a little bit better on the Genesis. I mean, I think like objectively in terms of sound quality and crispness and realism, the Super Nintendo was going to give you better results, but just in terms of the soul, Earthworm Jim's sound probably comes out ahead on the Sega Genesis. Now, there are a few games like that. I think that the WWF Royal Rumble and WWF Raw games may have had a sound a little better suited for the Genesis. It sounds very similar, like they're trying to do the same things, but I think that it kind of encapsulated the attitude that I associated with WWF at that time a little better, having the grittier soundtracks. And, you know, I can still remember Hacksaw Jim Duggan's and Hulk Hogan's intro music playing on that Genesis, and it was real deep and crunchy, and it just sounded cool. Whereas the Super Nintendo, you know, probably sounded a little better with those two games, but it didn't necessarily have the same soul because of the setting. You know what I mean? Like, if you were just going to listen to a soundtrack out of context and you have never played these games before, the Super Nintendo, you're going to be like, oh, those are better sounds. But that's not taking into account the soul and the setting. Like when you're playing Earthworm Jim on the Genesis, which Earthworm Jim was originally designed with 3 buttons in mind, so it actually works really, really well on the Genesis. It's not like one of those ports, where you come over to the Genesis, like Street Fighter or something like that, and you're going from Super Nintendo to the Genesis, and now you can't really figure out where all these commands are coming from because you only have 3 buttons. One example that I gave last time of sound that I think absolutely works better on the Super Nintendo is NHL 94. Which people really, really like the Sega Genesis version of that, and people seem to prefer sports games in general on the Sega Genesis. I like NHL 94 better on the Super Nintendo. I don't necessarily know if I would say that about any football games. I think that Mutant League Hockey and Mutant League Football are very, very cool, and those are available only on the Sega Genesis. And I think that Earthworm Jim may be on the Sega Genesis Mini that was just released recently. Let me look this up really quickly. I have been impressed with the Sega Genesis Mini's library. I know that there are some things that they couldn't get because of licensing, like the sports games that the Sega Genesis was so famous for are not coming out because they were difficult to get the licenses for. You know, they do have one EA game on there, Electronic Arts, and that is let me think, Road Rash. So here's some of the games on the Sega Genesis Mini, and if you haven't looked this up, this is a pretty good list. Echo the Dolphin, Castlevania Bloodlines, Space Harrier 2, Shining Force, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, which is just Puyo Puyo, Toe Jam and Earl, Sonic the Hedgehog, Comic Zone, which, while isn't critically acclaimed as a game, has one of the most interesting art styles that I think I've ever seen in a video game. Altered Beast, a launch title, that was one of those things where, like, hey, you're playing 8-bit Nintendo, get on over here to the Sega Genesis. We have Altered Beast. Sega Genesis does what Nintendo don't. Gunstar Heroes, Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse, World of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, Thunder Force 3, Super... I've never seen this game. Super Fantasy Zone. I've never played that. Shinobi 3. Earthworm Jim, there it is. Along with Streets of Rage 2, Sonic 2, Contra Hardcore, Landstalker, Beyond Oasis, Ghouls and Ghosts, Alex Kidd, Golden Axe, Phantasy Star, Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition, Mega Man and the Wily Wars. That's interesting because that comes with Mega Man 1, 2, and 3, and then once you beat those, a whole new game opens up that was never available to Nintendo owners. Sonic Spinball, Vector Man, Wonder Boy, Virtua Fighter 2, Alicia Dragoon, Columns, Dynamite Heady, Strider, Kid Chameleon, Light Crusader, Monster World 4, Eternal Champions, and Road Rash 2. I haven't played all those games. I bet I have played about half of them. But you have a lot of good games. And then, of course, the Super Nintendo Mini and the NES Classic did as well. At number 87, coming in with the base version, Street Fighter II, The World Warrior. Now, this is one of those things that Brian Chai brought up in a recent episode as a justification for DLC. Street Fighter II came out with, I believe, 4 different versions on the Super Nintendo, and it was a full-price game every time. This is the base version, released in 1992. And the characters in here are Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, Dalsum, Zangief, Blanca, E. Honda, or Guile. And it says Rage Against the machine being the tandem of Balrog, Vega, Sagat, and M. Bison. Sagat. I don't know if I've ever actually learned how to say his name. I've never thought about it. I've only read it. Sagat. So this is the first of 3 versions of Street Fighter II that you're going to see on this list. I think that there may have been a 4th one, but it wasn't as popular as the other 3. Like, the other 3 were actually big steps up. And the one that I can't remember, because there was Turbo and there was Champion, and there may have been Hyper, but I'm really not sure. 3 separate versions exist, and they all managed to make this list stand. Okay, so Sid Lexia doesn't seem to think that there are 4. I could definitely be wrong. This show's called Unpopular Opinions for a reason. He doesn't think that this version should have made the list because it was, even though it was the first Street Fighter II release on the SNES and its impact was the greatest, it doesn't stand the test of time. There are only 8 playable characters and 2 of them have the exact same moveset. Also, the game's pretty slow paced and it's very hard to go back to this once you've played Turbo, essentially since there's no reason to. Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone's going to argue. I'm not the biggest Street Fighter fan in the world, but if I had a choice, I'd play Turbo. Like, why wouldn't you? It has this entire base game plus everything better in it. And it's not like there's controller preferences or anything either because it's all on the Super Nintendo. Still, I have to give this game props if for no other reason than the instruction manual told you how to do everyone's special moves. I've never even heard of EGM in 1992. Electronic Gaming Monthly in 1992, much less seen a copy, so my arsenal of cool Street Fighter II fighting moves had been limited to Honda's 100-hand slap, Chun-Li's lightning kick, and Blanca's electricity until I rented this game and stole the photocopied instruction manual that Endless Video had stuck in the rental box. The build to Street Fighter II, The World Warrior, was enormous. Finally, gamers were getting a port of the arcade mega hit, and, at least to our young and very naive eyes, the thing looked arcade perfect. It would be outdone by various updates on every system known to man, but this was the original home version, and thus it remains in all of our hearts, pure and unmolested. And at least until we saw that anime where Chun-Li was... Why? Why is there an anime where Chun-Li is naked in the shower with boobs the size of melons? Of all of the things on the internet, some people decided to draw a cartoon of naked Chun-Li and have it compete with all the real melons out there. You know, I can go on the internet and see every set of melons that I want to, whether it's Sylvester Stallone's or Hillary Clinton's. Why do I need a cartoon of it? Well, I guess if we didn't need a cartoon of it, then they would have put some clothes on her in the actual game. Capcom knew what they were doing. Back in the day, Street Fighter II was the game that all other fighting games wish they could be. It was light years ahead of anything else that was available on this side of the world. We got 7 unique playable characters, 1 clone, and 4 bosses. For some reason, I always liked Blanca. Maybe I understood his pain, the troubled heartache of a youth who, by no fault of his own, is caught in a terrible accident, irreversibly altering his DNA and turning him into a monster in the eyes of others. Or maybe I just liked electrocuting people. Yeah, I've never gotten the full backstory on Blanca, but if that's actually true, that he was a little boy and was caught in a terrible accident, then yeah, maybe I have a little bit more sympathy for the green monster. As of now, I don't have a ton because I've never been able to beat one person using his electric attack. I mean, I've been able to beat people while I was using the electric attack, but while my opponent is Blanca and using the electric attack, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. Number 86, Desert Strike: Return to the Gulf, released in 1992 from Electronic Arts. This was before they were the terrible baddies that they are now, and they actually released some games that weren't just cash grabs. 1 year after the end of the Gulf War, General Ibn, the madman Kilbaba, seizes control of one of the United Arab Emirates as part of his insane plan to start World War III. I'm just reading this synopsis, so sorry if there are any typos in it. You are thrust into the role of a lone Apache helicopter pilot who must clear the way for ground troops by strategically neutralizing the general's forces. Unsurprisingly, you eventually fight the madman himself. I've never personally played this game. For some reason, in my favorite video game store, this is a game that they always have running the demo of. I guess it's they just want to let you know that they have Desert Strike. There are a few different Desert Strike games. I mean, there's Desert Strike and Jungle Strike. I'm not sure which ones came out on the SNES. I think that the 2 that I had mentioned did come out on the Genesis, because I was watching a video last night, and I think some people were surprised that neither of the Strike games were on there. I think they mentioned Jungle Strike and Desert Strike. So these also came out on the Sega Genesis. So it's pretty much exactly like Konami's Jackal, only you're in a helicopter instead of a Jeep. I didn't mind Jackal. I think that Jackal is a pretty decent game. The Middle East, and you're in a helicopter instead of a Jeep, the Middle East instead of Vietnam, and there aren't any giant evil statues. Okay, so it's nothing like Jackal. Screw you. Desert Strike is my favorite war game of all time, and one of my top choices for the SNES. The chopper controls are smooth and responsive, and the graphics in the game are very nice, except for the people, who kind of look like they came out of an Atari game. Overall, I love doing battle with the madman, who looks suspiciously like a certain deposed and disposed dictator. Blowing stuff up is always fun, but until you've played this game, you can't possibly understand the sheer terror that is a mobile SAM launcher. Now, number 85 coming up here is one of the games that I do not think gets nearly enough love on the Super Nintendo compared to its Sega Genesis counterpart. I think that this game is better on the Super Nintendo. Now, half of the attention this game on the Super Nintendo gets is in comparison to the Sega Genesis version, because that might be the best game on the Sega Genesis. And that's Aladdin. Disney's Aladdin. I think that this is a criminal act to only have this at number 85. I really, really like the way that Aladdin controls in this game. Now, I'm not saying that game number 85 is better than game number 1 on the Sega Genesis. I don't think that Aladdin was quite the best game on the Sega Genesis. Honestly, depending on the day you ask me, I might go with Gunstar Heroes. I might go with Sonic and Knuckles. I really, 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 really like playing as Knuckles. I don't think that Aladdin is the best game on the Sega Genesis. I can definitely understand how people appreciate that one, and I think it's a pretty good game too. I mean, you get a sword in that one. The graphics are just about spot on compared to the movie, and it's got some good songs. The very, very first level in that game, I believe, I don't know. I was going to say it's Prince Ali, but now actually I don't think it is. I don't know what I'm talking about. And again, this is why the thing's called Unpopular Opinions. Disney's Aladdin was released in 1993. In this adaptation of Disney's blockbuster animated feature, you'll guide Aladdin through Agrabah, the Cave of Wonders, the Genie's Lamp, a pyramid, and Jafar's palace. You'll also throw apples. Lots and lots of apples. So I don't remember, but I don't think in the Sega Genesis game you defeated a lot of enemies by jumping on them. It was mostly the sword play. Okay. That is what the word that defined two pretty big parts of my life. Sword play. One is Disney's Aladdin on the Sega Genesis. Two is my romantic endeavors. If you like sword play, those are the two areas that you need to go. You're not getting swordplay on Disney's Aladdin. You know, when I was crafting that up in my head as I was babbling nonsense, I was thinking about like literally swords, like the weapon in the bedroom. And I just remembered that sword fighting is just like, could also just be like two penises hitting each other. What's the plural of penises? Is it penisi? Two penisi. I don't know. It's probably just penises. Two penis. Smashing into each other. I don't know why, but in my head I was thinking like, oh, it's funny to imagine me and some lady like, you know, with a saber or a machete or something and like literally dueling with these weapons. I wasn't talking about smashing dick. It should come as no surprise to you that there were a bunch of video games that were released on both the Genesis and Super Nintendo. However, you may be surprised to learn that Aladdin was not one of them. Okay, that's misleading. Because it was... I guess it's true. I don't know. The same, different interpretations of the same game, I guess. I mean, they were made by different companies, but Nintendo was like, hey, we're going to get an Aladdin game. And Sega was like, hey, we're going to get an Aladdin game. And they're both Disney's Aladdin. But yeah, this isn't something that was like Madden or NHL or WWF Royal Rumble. And I wish I had examples of these games that were not sports games. But those sports games were just ports, you know? Like it's the same game on both consoles. Like today, you know, you buy a game on PS4 and you buy a game on Xbox One, you're expecting to get the same game. Even the Nintendo series, for the most part, is they're trying to give you the same experience on both systems. This was designed by two different groups of people. While it's true that games named Disney Aladdin were released for both systems, they are completely different in terms of gameplay, graphics, sound, designers, everything. The Genesis game was developed by Virgin Interactive, who did Lion King, which is a game that Virgin also did for the Sega Genesis, but that was just ported to the Super Nintendo. We didn't have different different designs and sound and everything. The sound chips were different, but it was they tried to make everything the same up to the limitations of the Genesis not having the same sound chip. The Genesis game was developed by Virgin Interactive, published by Sega, and featured sprites designed by some of Disney's animators. The SNES version was done entirely by Capcom. The Sega version is generally held in much higher regard, largely due to Disney's direct involvement in the project, but the Nintendo version is a good game in its own right. Think back to the NES days. Did a Capcom-produced Disney game ever disappoint you? Of course not, and neither will this. What's that? You played Adventures in the Magic Kingdom? Well, bummer. I don't know if I've ever played Adventures in the Magic Kingdom. I want to make sure that nobody just all of a sudden dismisses me and everything that I ever have to say when I say that I like the SNES version of Aladdin better than the Sega Genesis version. Okay, and I'm getting a little concerned here that I'm not even going to get through 10 games today because I'm 40 and a half minutes in and this is only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is only game number 5 that I've been on. This might be more than a 10-part series. I don't know. I mean, I didn't think that I had too much to say about any of these, but once I started rambling, oh boy, watch out, bud. I am a rambling man I am. I just love the way Aladdin controls in this game and the way he bounces off enemies, and I like it better than the sword. Now, the sword was done really, really, really well in the Sega Genesis version. It was. I'm not going to deny it. That Sega Genesis game is great. It is fantastic. I don't think it's the best game for the Sega Genesis, but it was one of the 3 best-selling games for the Sega Genesis. Now imagine if you had a movie tie-in today. Imagine there's like a game, not some Batman game that's developed to be a game, but like the Joker movie that just came out. Imagine if they just did a Joker tie-in game and it became the 3rd best-selling game on the PlayStation 4 or the Nintendo Switch. That's pert near unthinkable. But that's how good Disney's Aladdin was on the Sega Genesis. Like I said before, and I'm saying now, I am a Super Nintendo homer. I am. There's no disputing that. I grew up playing the Super Nintendo and didn't grow up playing the Sega Genesis. I also grew up never having seen Aladdin. So the fact that the Sega Genesis version was almost a perfect recreation of the animation style of the movie was kind of lost on me. And if that's really important to other people and you want to give the Sega Genesis version the nod entirely on that, then go ahead. And that is entirely up to you, and everyone is welcome to their opinion, especially about video games. If anyone has a different opinion than me on video games, I will gladly hear about it, because I'm just glad that you have an opinion on video games, retro video games in particular, and there's someone for me to talk to about it. I just love the way that Aladdin controls in the Super Nintendo. I almost said Super Genesis version. I'm talking Super Nintendo version. And I would have ranked that much higher than number 85 on this list. But you know, I would have had to take out just about every RPG ahead of this, just because I've never played them. The only one I really would have left in there was Super Mario RPG, because I did play that. It's also not like a JRPG type of Final Fantasy where you're worried about crafting and healing, and that one you just got some Mario characters and you bop around doing some turn-based combat. It's about as complicated as, like, it's probably less complicated than Pokemon Red and Blue were when those first came out. But the way that Aladdin bounces around and the way he controls, I really, really like the way he does this in the Super Nintendo version of Disney's Aladdin. Now, when I'm talking about how much I love this game, maybe it's not even in relation to the Sega Genesis game by the same name, because I don't want to take anything away from that. I really like Disney's Aladdin compared with other Super Nintendo games in general. I would say that this would easily be in my top 50, if not my top 20 or 25. And granted, I had never seen the movie up until this year. I didn't watch the animated version until the live version came out. But I really, really, really like Disney's Aladdin coming in at number 85 on this list. Number 84, Saturday Night Slam Masters, a very cartoony take on a wrestling game. The Capcom Wrestling Association's heavyweight title is currently vacant. Are you a bad enough dude to win the CWA title? Choose from 10 playable characters: Alexander the Greater, Bill Slamkovich, El Stingray, the Great Oni, Gunlock, Jumbo Flapjack, King Rasta, the Scorpion, Titanic Tim, and Final Fight's Mike Hager. Seemed like I listed more than 10, but, I've never played Saturday Night Slam Masters. If you like wrestling games and you don't care that you aren't saying it has to have a WWE, WWF, or WCW license, then this is a great game. It's a very, very arcadey. It's a quarter eater. It's an arcade port. I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I believe. Batman Returns. I am trying to remember what the absolute... Batman Forever. Batman Forever is a absolutely brutal game. Don't play Batman Forever. They tried to do like the mocap Mortal Kombat style of animation, and it just didn't come off. Everything's clunky. There are 10 different face buttons. You got left, right, up, down, LR, AB, XY. Literally 10 buttons that I like to use for actions, and you made me press select and something else to go up. Like, what Super Nintendo game does select come into play? That's the case on Batman Forever. Forget that one. This one's good. Batman Returns, number 83. The Penguin and his Red Triangle Circus Gang have taken over Gotham City. As Batman, the vigilante superhero, it's up to you to stop them. Along the way, you'll subdue the mentally unstable Catwoman and take the Batmobile out for a spin. Oh, and Vincent Chiavelli is one of the level bosses. How cool is that? Batman's cool. Beat-em-ups are cool. This is a Batman beat-em-up. If you like Batman and you like beat-em-ups, you'll like this one. There's not much else to say. Now, Batman Forever is also Batman and a beat-em-up. You won't like that one. That game controls terribly. You can damage the second player in co-op mode. I hate it. Nobody likes it. That was a game that I bought when I was a youngster because it was only $4, and it wasn't just to rent at the newsroom. It was Sharino's newsroom. Okay, but it wasn't $4 just to rent it, $4 to buy. I brought this home. I thought me and my brother are going to have a great time. We played it for maybe 10 minutes, and the only reason that I didn't give it a punt into the nearest ocean, which would have been quite a drive for me, was because I had the full box. I had the full box, and I didn't save a lot of the boxes from the 90s. But this one I did save. So I didn't get rid of that just because I thought it was cool that I had the whole box. Number 82, WCW Super Brawl Wrestling. This is kind of like the Fire Pro Wrestling series. I would say that this is probably the third best wrestling game on the Super Nintendo behind, WWF Royal Rumble and WWF Raw. It may be tied with WWF WrestleMania, the arcade game, although the Sega Genesis port of that game beat the pants out of the Super Nintendo version. And this is way better than WWF WrestleMania. So those would be the 5 licensed wrestling games on the Super Nintendo, and if I had to rank them, number 5, WWF WrestleMania, do not play that. Number 4, WWF arcade game. Yeah, I think that's what I'm going to go, and I'm going to put WCW Super Brawl Wrestling at number 3, WWF Raw at number 2, which is probably objectively better than Royal Rumble, which I'll put at number 1. I just like the character roster in Royal Rumble better. That still had Macho Man. That still had Ric Flair. If you're playing the Genesis version, it had IRS, and it had Hulk Hogan. Jim Duggan, and there were a lot of good wrestlers in both versions of the game. Ted DiBiase was a Super Nintendo exclusive. Yokozuna was a Super Nintendo exclusive, but Razor Ramon, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Undertaker, they were all on both games, and that's primarily the new generation era. And those are the guys who are in the WWF. The WWF Raw game. So here's the roster. Dustin Rhodes, who is still active today. Does that blow your mind? This game released in 1994 on a defunct system by a defunct developer, by a defunct publisher, for a defunct league. This dude is still wrestling. Dustin Rhodes, Vader, Ron Simmons, Barry Windham, Ricky Steamboat, Johnny B. Bad, who was Mark Miro, Brian Pillman, Rick Rude, Ric Flair, Sting, and the Steiner brothers. So Brian Pillman's passed away. I don't know about Barry Windham. Oh, Brian Pillman and Rick Rude. So there are more wrestlers that have passed away than are still active. That's why I think it's cool. I was talking about this on the first version of Solo List Assault. Why I really, really like when you get a snapshot of an obscure athlete, of an obscure time in an athlete's career. Whether it would have been, I think at NHL 98, Ed Belfour was on the San Jose Sharks roster, who he only played like 14 of his 1,000 career games for. I think that's cool. I think it's cool when in NBA Live 2003, Michael Jordan is on the Washington Wizards. I think it's cool when today I can go back and play this game from 1994 and look at a very, very young Dustin Rhodes and see where he is in 2019, having a match of the year candidate with his brother Cody Rhodes in AEW. Which some of the wrestlers in AEW weren't even alive when this game was created, much less AEW, the promotion. Number 81, and the last one for today, Tiny Toon Adventures Buster Bust Loose. I have not played this game. I have seen it mentioned on some hidden gems or games that aren't too expensive to add to your Super Nintendo collection. So if you like Looney Tunes or Tiny Toons and you like Konami, anything Konami or Capcom were generally pretty good. Generally. Konami, had Sunset Riders, which was awesome. And then Capcom, they had their Mega Man and Aladdin, the Mickey Mouse games. Konami and Capcom, I'm sorry, were two of the best third party boys doing it. They were two of the best to do it back in the 90s. Tiny Toon Adventures, Buster Bust Loose, Guide Buster. My voice just cracked a little bit there. Good thing nobody's listening 54 minutes in. Guide Buster Bunny through 6 levels of platforming fun in Acme Luniversity, a Western movie, a haunted house, a football game, the sky in outer space. Why? Well, why not? Also, there's 5 mini games. I've never played this game, but I do respect these guys' opinions besides how highly they rate RPGs. I telling you, SNES Drunk, I think, has covered this game, and he's given it a thumbs up, just like I hope you'll give this podcast, guys. Thank you so much for sticking with me through 50-some minutes of me rambling to nobody in particular. I'm Ryan Tofil. This has been Unpopular Opinions, Solo List Assault version 2.2. And, guys, thank you so much for the incredible amount of downloads we had on version 2.1. It was the second most downloads I've ever had on a podcast. And please, guys, if you could keep it up, get a hold of me at Rytoff on Twitter. Let me know. Excuse me, that ginger ale just came up that I drank in the third minute. Excuse me. That's disgusting. Just as I'm about to ask you to hit me up at Rytoff on Twitter, just let me know that you're listening. Okay, it would be really awesome to meet somebody out there who appreciates this. I know that a Super Nintendo podcast like this is what I've been looking for a very long time, and SNES Drunk, He does it way better than me on YouTube and is a lot better performer, editor, speaker. Go check out SNES Drunk on YouTube, but there isn't really a podcast variation of his channel. And I'm not nearly as knowledgeable as him. I guess he just likes to talk for 5 minutes at a time, and I'm a bit of a braggart, and I like to go for 55 minutes at a time. But thank you for sticking with me, guys. If you enjoyed it, please keep downloading. Share this on Facebook, or reach out to me on Twitter at Rytoff. Guys, no matter how you're feeling, somebody cares about you, even if that somebody is me. And thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this and get to come out here and talk to nobody, but have it go to somebody. So this has been Unpopular Opinions. Have a good afternoon, good evening, good night. I don't know when you're listening. I'm just sure glad that you did listen. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.